Welcome to a presentation of August Publications. My name is Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. We have a special edition for you today, a special chat. I'm joined first by the owner and publisher of August Publications, Kevin Reichard. How are you?
I am great, Jesse. Thanks for asking.
We are going to speak with Doug Fox about the Howleyites, Toronto's changing city, a stadium rising, and the champions of 1926. But Kevin, first, what was it that appealed to you about Doug's book?
God, I think I share something with Doug that we both have a really deep interest in history, and kind of specifically how baseball played out in the history of a very specific area, in this case Toronto. And then, you had the rise of the team, you had the rise of the ballpark, which is Maple Leaf Stadium is sort of legendary in minor league circles as one of the great old palaces of baseball that regrettably is gone. And you combine those two with, Doug's pitch was perfect. His manuscript was great. This was kind of a no-brainer for us.
And so, to that end, we bring in a man
Mhm.
who I first became acquainted with as the foremost non-hired by the Blue Jays authority on Toronto Blue Jays minor league baseball. Doug Fox, how are you?
Jesse, I'm fantastic. It is great to see you again. I miss my trips to Lansing, let me tell you.
Uh, uh, well, let's go back 100 years. In fact, let's go back more than 100 years because you set the groundwork for what will become a championship team. It is it is a book that covers so much ground. And one of those things that it seeks to do is to tell the story of Toronto's rise. Where did you begin with your research?
Um, if you can believe it, I began in the 1880s. Toronto's baseball history goes back 141 years, and a lot of people from the current generation don't realize it goes much beyond the 50 years. The Blue Jays will be selling, I guess, year number 49, celebrating tomorrow. But I started with the early 1920s. Toronto was very much a changing city. Canada was changing. We came out of World War One, where we joined with Britain. Britain made the decisions for us militarily, as they had for a number of years. Even though we were an independent country, they had made decisions economically, diplomatically. We had very close ties with Britain. But at the end of World War One, we began to see a bigger picture. We began to look for closer ties with the United States, which made a lot more sense on north-south lines. We began to flex our muscles diplomatically on the world stage. We had a political crisis in there as well, a constitutional crisis, if you will. So Toronto was changing. It was becoming a more of a multicultural city as opposed to a British city, as a flood of immigrants came in after World War One. So the face of the city was changing. The city was growing by leaps and bounds, and it was felt that a new ballpark was needed. A new ballpark was needed on the mainland because for many years, off and on, the main ballpark was over on Toronto Islands, which required a ferry ride and dodging multiple sets of railway tracks. Pedestrian safety in the early 1900s not being what it is today, of course. So it was felt that the stadium needed to be on the mainland. And then, of course, to have this stadium, which was considered to be state of the art and the best outside of Major League Baseball for its time, you needed a championship team as well. But both the stadium and the team needed several years of construction. And things really began then in the early 20s when a gentleman named Lol Solomon, a well-known Toronto entrepreneur, took over charge of the team. He was the team president, and he brought in a gentleman named Dan Howley, who was highly regarded as a teacher, as a strategist, as a developer of players. And he was actually sent to Toronto by Ty Cobb, who was managing the Detroit Tigers at the time. And he was sent to help develop prospects, which, of course, is one of my first loves, talking about prospects. And so Dan was sent to build a team, which was definitely different in the 1920s. Where teams were still independent, and the relationship they had with teams was more of an agreement as opposed to what we have today, where the major league teams own the players lock, stock, and barrel. So
Doug,
Dan had to develop players and bring in players as well. Sorry.
I want to dip back into the 1880s because there are all sorts of little things that jumped out to me. Um, can you just this little line that you dip into the book? Why did baseball eclipse cricket as the top sports love for the natives of Toronto?
That's a very good question. Cricket, of course, being a British game, as you might expect, Canada was a British colony up until 1867, where actually the four provinces that formed Canada in 1867 were formed as British colonies. So cricket certainly still was very, very popular. Baseball was kind of distrusted in Toronto, and it was a little bit slow compared to the rest of Ontario, where the game in southwestern Ontario moved across the border from Detroit and throughout southwestern Ontario. But Toronto kind of held off on the game, and I think it was because at that time, Torontonians and a lot of Canadians, Upper Canadians, as the province of Ontario was once known, were distrustful of the United States. Democracy was a relatively new concept, and it wasn't completely trusted by people with British background. They preferred the British political system, the monarchy. And so there was a distrust of any and all things American, baseball being part of it. But I mean, you can only hold back the wave for so long. And by the 1870s, professional games were being played in the city. The city had a few teams. The railways came to Toronto and connected Toronto with the United States, and the ties just developed from there. But that's basically how the game eventually eclipsed baseball or cricket, mainly because it doesn't take as long to play and it offers just a multitude of gambling possibilities, and everybody gambled on baseball and sports in general. Well, people have always gambled on sports, but especially at that time period. And so I think that's what really they caught on with the gambling community, and other people in Toronto began to take notice as well. But baseball, certainly from the 1880s on, and in Toronto, baseball was the game. Hockey was still a very seasonal sport. Maybe only 5 or 6, maybe 2 or 3 months long. Rugby football was catching on, but it was still from the 1880s until the 1920s. Baseball was the game in Toronto.
It's something that you detail so well that Toronto's fascination with baseball doesn't begin with the Blue Jays, that baseball is Toronto's sport above everything else. And we turn the century, and now let's pick up your chief characters because I want to talk about Howling Dan with you, or Orator Dan. How did Dan Howley capture your imagination?
Dan was just one of those larger than life figures. He managed in Montreal prior to coming to Toronto. He roomed very unsuccessfully with Babe Ruth. And there's a Toronto connection there. Babe Ruth in 1918, Red Sox manager Ed Barrow was trying to convert him to an everyday player, and Babe balked at that at first, mainly because it was going to curtail on his nightlife activities. Barrow had managed in Toronto in the early 1900s and kept very close connections throughout his life with the city. Married a woman from Toronto and came back to stay in the city quite often. And so Dan, just for his time in Montreal, his time chaperoning Babe Ruth, reputation that he received, the first year with the Tigers had finished last, and I think it was 1921. He joined Ty Cobb's coaching staff. The season before, the Tigers were last in the American League, or next to last in hitting. So Dan said batting practice will primarily be live pitching. So the Tigers hitters were facing live pitching in batting practice. They had the second highest average in the American League that year. So he had this reputation. He was well known throughout the league. He was a very fancy dresser as well. Dapper Dan was one of his nicknames. I have a great picture of him in a three-piece suit with a fedora and spats, and he looked very much like you'd expect somebody in the 1920s, almost gangster-like. So he was just a fascinating character, and he went on to manage in the big leagues after his time in Toronto, but he still came back. And for off and on for about 15 years, he was the face of the franchise in Toronto. Because, of course, with minor league teams, players would come and go from year to year, or maybe every 2 or 3 years. But Dan, Howling Dan, was always there, and he was part of the marketing efforts for the team as well. So just a fascinating. Crash Davis as I called him, long before Nuke LaLoosh and Bull Durham and everything else. That's the kind of character that he was, the typical backup minor league catcher who found success as a manager.
This book does such a dramatic job of setting the stage for the 1926 season. So we have everything that's happening off the field. We have the context of everything that's happening in non-sports life. And then there's the challenge. How do you compete against Jack Dunn and the Baltimore Orioles? What kind of rival was Dunn and the Orioles?
Uh, Jack Dunn, through legitimate and perhaps not so legitimate means, dominated the International League for close to a decade. He uh, he was so successful at what he did, he was able to manipulate some of the teams in the lower reaches of the International League standings, teams that were in financial trouble. He would often pluck a couple of their players towards the end of the season for these cash-strapped teams, and that seemed to perpetuate the Orioles. But he had a network of scouts across the country, so that was getting him players like Lefty Grove, and the Orioles just were always so dominant. I think towards the 1925, 1926, he was starting to get into failing health. And so I think there was a little bit of an opening there, but that was the Orioles certainly were they were a juggernaut. And I think the way that that the Toronto Maple Leafs in 1926 were able to topple them was they built a team that was built entirely on pitching and defense. Maple Leaf Stadium it wasn't just pitcher friendly; it was downright pitcher chummy. The dimensions were so big, and it being next to Lake Ontario, the winds coming in off the lake, especially in the spring, tended to keep offense down. And it's kind of typical. The Leafs won their home opener on a soggy late April day. They were down 5-0 in the bottom of the ninth, and they came back to tie the game and win it in extra innings without the benefit of an extra base hit. So they played small ball, but it was pitching. Howley had the best pitching staff outside of Major League Baseball in 1926, and that's basically how they toppled the Orioles.
So I know that something very close to Kevin's heart. Let's get into Maple Leaf Stadium because it's the story of a man in Howley. It's the story of a team, but it's also the story of one of the great facilities in the game's history. And when it opened up, I loved this quote: absolutely nothing overlooked or forgotten, as near perfection as possible to have a baseball park. It is state of the art in 1926. For Lowell Solomon, what was everything that went into building the best park of its day?
There was a lot that went into that stadium, and I have to be honest, it was no thanks to Toronto City Council. They were there was quite a bit of debate, there was quite a bit of controversy, even a little bit of scandal, but it took a great deal for Solomon to get the stadium built. He originally wanted the stadium built about a block north of where the Rogers Center is today, but he was told no because Ontario Hydro wanted to build a generating station there to heat downtown businesses. So they said, we have this piece of land a couple of blocks west, which did not turn out to be as suitable as Solomon would have liked. So there was a lot that went into the building of the stadium. It was so state of the art. It had a covered grandstand from about halfway down the left field line all the way around to the right field line. It kept the spectators dry. They had spared no expense. They had marble dust on the outside facade. It was just a wonderful stadium when it opened. And Judge Landis was there. He missed the opening day because the date was scheduled for was rained out, and he had another commitment, so he had to move on. But he pronounced it right away the best facility outside of the minor leagues. And it was actually the original plans had. They were going to build the grandstand roof such that another deck could be built on, so that if a major league team were to move to Toronto, it could play in the stadium. But unfortunately, Solomon ran short of funds in the construction. But it was still a marvel, and the stadium was used for. It was used for baseball. It was used for high school track and field, amateur baseball, Canadian Football League games, exhibition games with touring NFL teams were played there as well. Circuses, Greek wrestling matches, soccer games, you name it, were held at that stadium. It was truly a sporting cathedral, which is what Los Alman wanted.
Well, and this takes me into that the book is such a time capsule. You are transporting the reader directly back into the mid 1920s. This is what life is like if you are in the Toronto area, the Greater Toronto area, and it's 1926. And here's Mrs. Mackenzie surviving after accidentally stepping off a moving train. Here's the bootlegging of poisonous alcohol and the damage that it can wreak. Here's Jack Dempsey getting upset by Gene Tunney. What kind of fun did you have in looking back at everything else that was going along, filling in what the experience was of living through this summer?
And an unknown Cape Bretoner named Johnny Miles winning the Boston Marathon
The
a
Johnny
100 years
Miles
ago
story
this
is
month.
so good.
It was so much fun. I grew up reading the Toronto Star. My father had a subscription for over 40 years, and I'm now writing for the Toronto Star. I'm so proud to say. But just looking back, I would through my newspapers.com subscription and Toronto Public Library. They use ProQuest. I would search for a particular person or a particular incident, and then I would find it in the sports section of, say, the Toronto Star. But then I would, after I'd taken my notes, I would scroll back in the pages and find the first page just to kind of get a flavor of what was going on. And my goodness, they do not make news. Well, they certainly do not make newspapers like that anymore. But sports sections, we know the 1920s were the golden age of sports. They were the golden age of sports sections. If there was a sport going on in the city, it was in the Star. And the ads themselves were a work of art, and they were worth whether it was advertising snow tires or cigarettes or shaving cream or whatever. It's a time that's long gone, but it was so wonderful to read through those pages. I had a great time, a lot of fun researching.
The important things in life,
Yes,
cigarettes and snow tires.
yes.
The team itself, there's such a great mixture of the players who are local and the players who've been found from elsewhere. 1925, they've got Charlie Gehringer in the
Yeah.
infield, but you lose him, you've got to figure out how to replace him. You mentioned the pitching, and there's a young Carl Hubble, all the while Ty Cobb is trying to sabotage his career.
Absolutely, and I have to tell you, as an aside, our youngest son, who my kids did not grow up playing baseball; they played soccer because that was the sport of millennials. Um, so our youngest son is still new to baseball, a huge Blue Jays fan, as you might expect. But he was reading the back cover of the book, and he said, "Who's Carl Hubble?" Oh my goodness! So we had to have a little explanation there, but. Hubble had developed a screwball, a fadeaway, and he discovered it by accident while pitching in the lower reaches of the Tigers minor league system in 1924, 1925. Hurt his arm a little bit, but lifted weights to strengthen his arm. And
Oh,
it really,
squeezing the rubber ball.
yeah, exactly. But it certainly was a devastating pitch. Ty Cobb didn't trust it. And I think that's because one of Ty Cobb's coaches had caught somebody who had thrown a screwball and wrecked his arm. And so Hubble was sent to Toronto just to finish working on his pitches, but he was forbidden to use. He was forbidden expressly by Cobb. Cobb sent a telegram to Howley. It was waiting for Howley in his office when he got to Toronto saying, yeah, he can't use the screwball. So the funny thing is the Washington Senators came to town in early June for an exhibition game, common thing for major league teams to do back then. And so Hubble was mainly just used in long relief, second games of double headers, mop up, you name it. Howley did not put him in what we call leverage situations today. He wasn't in the starting rotation. But for this game against the Senators, Howley decided to let Hubble have a start. And Hubble was warming up with the Leafs catcher Steve O'Neill, a major league veteran, later a very successful major league manager who never had a losing season. And so Hubble, just as a lark, threw a couple of screwballs. And so O'Neill went to him and said, do you want to throw that pitch in the game? And Hubble said, can I? And he said, if you won't tell, I won't tell. Howley didn't want to know. And Hubble, I think gave up one run and 6 hits, pitched a complete game. But after that, no more screwball. He had to go back, and he pitched very little down the stretch, didn't pitch in the playoffs at all. So Ty Cobb, brilliant ball player. There's no doubt about that. But as an evaluator of talent, lots to, I think, be desired there. And that was his last year as the manager.
Tigers lost, Giants gain.
Yes.
There are the players who would not be immediately familiar to baseball fans and their contributions to this incredible Maple Leafs team. Which players jump out to you?
Oh, definitely Owen Carroll. Owen Carroll was a Tigers highly rated prospect. We didn't do top 10 prospects in the 1920s, but he certainly would have been at the top of the Tigers list. He was one of the most successful collegiate pitchers of all time with Holy Cross. Pitched for the Tigers in 1925, wasn't quite ready, so he was sent to the Dan Howley finishing school, and he won, I think, his first 12 decisions, and pitched incredibly well. Walter Stewart, who later pitched for Howley in St. Louis, a left-handed pitcher, but
Lefty Stewart.
Lefty Stewart. But I love this name. Howley's best pitcher down the stretch, and who he started in two of the playoff games of the Little World Series, was Jess Slow Motion Doyle, who threw three speeds: slow, slower, and slowest. But he just managed to baffle hitters with his pitches, and in the playoffs, facing a Louisville team from the American Association that had never faced him before, they were completely unable to hit him. And so those are the three that stand out. Steve O'Neill was certainly somebody that stood out as well. I think getting him was a real key acquisition for Howley because he worked with the pitching staff so well, and he played good defense. And from time to time, Howley went on scouting trips, and so O'Neill would take over as manager as well. So I think he was a really important part of that team as well. Not a team of stars. Not a team with anybody who finished terribly high in the I think in the batting race or anything like that. More a bunch of more veteran journeyman players, but a very solid lineup. But once again, built around the likes of Doyle and Lefty Stewart and a youngster Vic Sorrell. Also pitched for the Tigers as well. Came I think from Wake Forest partway through the season. He gave the team a boost as well.
It was nearly a team of celebrity. I mean, Lionel Conacher.
Lionel Conacher was one of the greatest athletes. Well, he was voted Canada's greatest athlete of the first half of the 1900s. He was a champion wrestler, boxer, lacrosse player, won Stanley Cups. Baseball probably was his least accomplished sport, and I'm sure he was sold or he was acquired more to sell tickets. But he played very little. I think got into two games, once as a defensive replacement, once to pinch hit later on in a lost cause, and he went back to hockey full time after that. But another player that was signed as well, who they had high hopes for, was Babe Dye, who played for the Toronto St. Pats, who not too long after that became the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is another story for another time. But Dye was a very accomplished hockey player, had led the St. Pats to a Stanley Cup, had won a scoring championship, was regarded as having the hardest shot in all of the NHL. And he was offered, I think, something like $35,000 to play for Connie Mack, but turned it down. But he was a veteran minor leaguer, had played very well in a number of minor league seasons leading up to 1926. He hurt his back in the NHL playoffs just before spring training, and that limited him. And actually, the Leafs wound up releasing him in July. But once again, probably somebody who was signed to help sell some tickets.
I mean, that's the other thing. They could have been better. Dale Alexander was a player who
Yeah.
was taken away from them right at the very start of the season. He does join them in ensuing years. He wins the Triple Crown.
Yeah. Sidelined by a case of the mumps
Hmm.
in spring training. And it sounds like the Leafs, after spring training in Georgia, made their way north, and as teams of that era did, they barnstormed along the way and played games. And so they stopped in Alexander's hometown, I believe in North Carolina, and played. And he had played for the local team the season before, and he hit a home run in this exhibition game against the Leafs. And it sounds like apparently the price for Alexander went up as a result as well. So that's why Howley decided to go with a veteran named Mickey Heath, who later played in the big leagues and had a long minor league career as well. But yeah, Dale Alexander. Imagine the thump that he might have provided in that lineup.
I'm going to come back to the season, but I would like you to answer a question that is posed not by you, but by the media of the day. Doug, does baseball hurt morals of girls who play the game?
I love that. That was from the Toronto Star Weekly. Toronto had very strong, very strict Sabbath laws in those days. The Leafs 6 times had to play a Saturday doubleheader, the most popular day of the week, pack up and head off to Buffalo or Rochester, play a doubleheader there, and then more often than not had to get on a train after that and come back to Toronto to play a number of times. So you couldn't play baseball on Sundays, nor could you publish a newspaper. So the Toronto Star got around that by, in addition to their Saturday paper, they produced a supplement called the Star Weekly, which most people read on Sundays because it was long form articles that people on the Sabbath had more time to read. But yeah, that was one of many, many articles, and that just caught my eye, and it expressed I think the attitudes of the day, where it's like girls sports, okay, we think. It was just interesting to see the attitudes of that time. And 2 years later, women for the first time were allowed to compete at the Summer Olympics. And Canada fielded a very, very competitive women's running team, track team, as a result as well. So it was interesting to see the changing attitudes of the era.
The name of your book, The Howleyites, Toronto's Changing City, A Stadium Rising, and the Champions of 1926. We've talked about the changing city. We've talked about the Stadium Rising. And now to the champions. Because this team, once they found their groove and they locked in, they were not going to be stopped. And there were the Louisville Colonels who had the
Mhm.
bad fortune to face them in, would you prefer the Little World Series or the Junior World Series?
Kevin had pointed out they were not called the Junior World Series at that time, and I hadn't stopped to realize that. And I think the terms were used interchangeably, but Little World Series, I guess, would have been the official name.
So it's first team to win five. It's best 5 out of 9, which I think about with World Series. The 1919 World Series was the very first that was a best out of 5 in Major League Baseball. They gave it a try and they decided, let's not. And in fact, the 1926 World Series, I believe that was best 4 out of 7. That's the
Yes.
Grover Cleveland Alexander against Tony Lazzeri. But first team to win 5. And what do the Maple Leafs do? But they steamroll Louisville in 5 straight. They've got them demoralized by the end of this series, Doug.
Absolutely. And aside, if only last year's World Series was a best of 9. Anyway, uh, the first 4 games were played in Toronto, and they were all very close games. But the Leafs, using their small ball, the pitching, they won all 4 of those games. And yes, by the time the series returned to Louisville, the Colonels were a very dispirited lot. And they were fighting amongst themselves and fighting with the umpires, and the Leafs won handily in the final game. The first time that anybody had swept anywhere, apparently, a best of 9 series. And 4 of the games were close. The fifth one weren't, but the Leafs wasn't rather, but the Leafs were full credit for the victory. Howley did just a fantastic job of having the team peak at the right time. They won 38 of their last 47 games to win the International League pennant going away. Just a masterful job, and the series actually didn't draw that well. From a fan standpoint, which I found really interesting because I would think, wow, Little World Series, Toronto. It's been a number of years since you've been in one, but the series did not draw well in Toronto, and did not draw well in Louisville as well. But very interesting.
Kevin, I apologize for spoiling the ending.
It's on the cover. It's on the back cover. So there's really no spoiler alert here.
Doug, a classic question, maybe cliched, but I'm going to ask you. When an author writes a book, it changes them. How were you different at the end of finishing this book than when you began it?
I think I had a much greater appreciation for the city of Toronto. I didn't grow up in Toronto, but We live about 2 hours away, and it's the city we go to for entertainment, for doctor's appointments, for shopping. Our son and daughter-in-law now live there. Um, I had a greater appreciation for the city and what it must have been like in the 1920s, because my wife's mother was born about 6 months after the Leafs won. Um, so I really got an appreciation for what the city meant to the fans, and I got an appreciation of what growing up in Toronto in the 20s and the 30s must have been like. And my dad, as a young man in the early 50s, moved to Toronto from a small Eastern Ontario farm where they had no electricity, no running water, and no telephone. But dad was still a huge baseball fan, and he lived not very far away in an area of Toronto called Parkdale. That was very close to the stadium, and he used to go to Saturday doubleheaders, and I wonder what that was like for him. So I think it made me feel more connected, definitely with my dad, who passed just last year, and with my mother-in-law, who had passed a couple years earlier, and that was their city, and I think I had a greater appreciation for it, and a greater appreciation for Toronto as a result.
Doug, that's powerful. The Howleyites, Toronto's changing city, a stadium rising, and the champions of 1926 by D.M. Fox. Kevin, show that book once again.
I will indeed show this book. It is widely available everywhere. Amazon, Amazon.ca. Ingram ships to both US and Canada. And uh, we had some Canadian bookstores offering it early as a pre-sale, interestingly enough. So happy to see that. And buy it, read it. It's great.
As we conclude, we just had a Toronto team, and Doug, you mentioned this, heartbreakingly, come up short, striving for a championship. Um, they are one of the best teams in baseball. Baseball fervor in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, because I know how much Vancouver loves its Canadians, um, is terrific right now. And so it's so good to look back and say, this is not a recent thing that Canada embraces baseball. This is something that all you have to do is have a sense and a love of history. And look at this. And Doug brings us right back. And it's so cool to see how these amazing people jump off the page and what happened. And Doug, Rogers Center, where it is now, not located all that far away from there where Maple Leaf Stadium was.
Definitely. Right near the Canadian National Exhibition Grounds, which is going to it's now home of BMO Stadium, that's going to host a World Cup game in June as well. So it's just a hive of activity. I wish I can say that I am old enough to have been alive when Maple Leaf Stadium was around, and my dad had actually took my brother to a couple of games. My brother remembers, but I was too young. But Maple Leaf Stadium no longer. It was torn down in 1968, and the team actually, ironically, moved to Louisville. The team they vanquished in 1926. But I think that just shows the connections. You know, baseball. I've written many times. Baseball is definitely a game of connections. Canada, and we may have a border between us, but it's the game that we all grew up playing, regardless of where we grew up in North America. And Canada has always embraced the game, and always will. And just last thought of connections is things kind of came full circle for me with Game 6 of the World Series, even though the Blue Jays lost. And somehow I had that feeling when Addison Barger's double lodged onto the outfield wall. I thought this might not be meant to be, but I was there in attendance at the game with my two sons, and so that was even though the result was not the desired one. That was something that I truly appreciated, and made me appreciate the story of the Howleyites that much more.
I truly appreciate you, Doug. Kevin Reichard, final thoughts.
Doug just summed up why we love baseball and why you're going to love this book. It's full of that passionate sentiment about what brings us together, the history, the rich history of Toronto and Canada in the past, and it's a great read. It's really well written. It was a lot of fun to edit and publish.
Hmm.
The Howleyites, Toronto's changing city, a stadium rising, and the champions of 1926 by D.M. Fox, released by August Publications. Doug Fox, thank you so much for the time.
Jesse, thank you so much, and it was so great to see you. And I can't thank Kevin enough for his guidance throughout this project and for taking a chance on an old rookie like myself. I am just so grateful.
And for Kevin Reichard, owner and publisher of August Publications, I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. Thank you for taking the time and dig in.